Chapter 1. The Perfect Plan. I thought I was giving my family the perfect gift. 3 weeks in Barcelona, staying in a gorgeous apartment overlooking Las Ramblas, with enough money saved to show my parents and brother the trip of a lifetime. What I didn't know was that my brother Marcus had been planning something entirely different, something that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning we arrived at El Prat Airport, I was practically vibrating with excitement. I'd been planning this trip for 2 years, working double shifts at the restaurant, skipping nights out with friends, all so I could surprise my parents with their dream European vacation. Mom had always talked about seeing Gaudi's architecture, and Dad wanted to experience authentic Spanish culture. Even Marcus, who usually complained about everything, seemed genuinely happy when I announced the trip. But as we collected our luggage, I noticed something strange. Marcus kept checking his phone, typing messages with an intensity that made my stomach twist. When I asked who he was texting, he just shrugged and said, "Work stuff." That should have been my first red flag, but I was too caught up in the magic of finally being in Barcelona. The taxi ride through the city was everything I dreamed of. The Gothic quarter's narrow streets wound like ancient secrets, and the Mediterranean sun painted everything in golden light. Mom pressed her face to the window, pointing out every architectural detail, while Dad attempted to practice his broken Spanish with the driver. I felt this overwhelming sense of pride. I had made this happen. I had brought my family together for something beautiful. Our apartment was perfect, just like the photos online. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, and a balcony that offered a stunning view of the bustling street below. As we unpacked, I pulled out the itinerary I'd carefully crafted. Sagrada Familia tomorrow, Park Güell the day after, followed by a flamenco show I'd already booked and paid for. "This is incredible, Sarah," Mom said, pulling me into a hug. "I can't believe you did all this for us." Dad nodded approvingly as he explored the apartment. "You've outdone yourself, sweetheart." But Marcus was quiet, still glued to his phone. When I asked if he wanted to grab dinner at a tapas place I'd researched, he barely looked up. "Actually, I need to make a call. You guys go ahead." Something in his tone made my chest tighten, but I pushed the feeling away. This was supposed to be perfect. This was supposed to be the trip that brought us closer together, the adventure we'd remember forever. I had no idea that by tomorrow night, I'd be sitting alone on that beautiful balcony, crying and wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Chapter 2. First Cracks. The next morning started exactly as I'd planned. We walked to Sagrada Familia, and I watched my parents' faces light up as they took in Gaudi's impossible architecture. The basilica rose before us like something from a fever dream, all organic curves and intricate stone lacework that seemed to breathe in the morning light. Mom actually gasped when she saw it, and for a moment everything felt perfect again. But Marcus was acting stranger than ever. He kept wandering away from our group, talking quietly on his phone in corners where he thought we couldn't hear. When Dad asked him to pose for a family photo in front of the nativity facade, Marcus snapped, "Can we just focus on seeing the place instead of documenting every second?" The tension was palpable. Dad's face fell, and Mom quickly intervened with forced cheerfulness, but the damage was done. Inside the basilica, as we marveled at the forest of columns reaching toward the ceiling like stone trees, I found myself watching Marcus instead of the architecture. He wasn't taking in any of it. He was checking his watch, scanning the crowds, acting like he was waiting for something. "Marcus, what's going on?" I finally confronted him as our parents admired the stained glass windows that cast rainbows across the stone floor. "Nothing's going on, Sarah. Stop being paranoid." "Paranoid? You've been acting weird since we got here. You're barely present, you're constantly on your phone, and you just ruined Dad's photo moment." He turned to face me fully, and something in his expression made my blood run cold. It wasn't guilt or embarrassment. It was something that looked almost like pity. "Some things are more important than photos, Sarah. You'll understand soon enough." Before I could ask what he meant, Mom called us over to see the Passion facade. The rest of our visit passed in uncomfortable silence, with Marcus trailing behind like he was being forced to participate in his own life. By the time we reached Park Güell that afternoon, the magical feeling of our first day had completely evaporated. The park should have been another highlight. The colorful mosaics, the whimsical architecture, the panoramic views of Barcelona spreading out below us. But Marcus's mood was infecting everything. He sat on a bench while the rest of us explored, staring at his phone with an expression I couldn't read. "Is he okay?" Mom whispered to me as we walked along the serpentine bench overlooking the city. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's been acting strange since we arrived." That evening, I suggested we try the flamenco show I'd booked, but Marcus announced he was going to bed early. As he disappeared into his room, I heard him on the phone again, his voice too low to make out words, but urgent enough to make my stomach churn. Something was happening, something I wasn't aware of, and it was slowly poisoning the trip I'd worked so hard to create.
Chapter 3. The Phone Call. I couldn't sleep that night. The sounds of Barcelona drifted up from the street, late-night conversations, the distant hum of traffic, music from nearby bars, but all I could think about was Marcus's strange behavior. Finally, around 2 a.m., I gave up and stepped onto the balcony for some air. That's when I heard him. Marcus was in his room, door closed, but his voice carried through the thin walls. He was speaking in hushed, urgent tones, and something about his inflection made me freeze. I crept closer to his door, my heart hammering as I strained to listen. "Tomorrow night at the restaurant. Make sure everything's ready. No, she has no idea. Trust me, this is the only way. Yes, I know it's going to hurt her, but she needs to know the truth." My legs felt weak. Restaurant? What restaurant? And what truth was he talking about? I pressed my ear against the door, desperate to hear more, but his voice dropped even lower. All I could make out were fragments, like "been lying for years" and "deserves better than this." The call ended abruptly, and I scrambled back to my room, mind racing. Marcus was planning something for tomorrow night, something that involved a restaurant and some kind of truth that he thought I needed to know. The question was, did I want to find out, or should I try to stop it before it destroyed our family vacation completely?
Chapter 4. Unraveling. I spent the day trying to act normal while my mind raced with possibilities. We visited the Picasso Museum, wandered through the Gothic Quarter's labyrinthine streets, and stopped at small cafes where Mom practiced her Spanish with patient waiters. But everything felt surreal, like I was watching our family vacation through a fog of anxiety. Marcus, meanwhile, had transformed completely. Gone was the distant, distracted man from the past 2 days. He was engaged, charming, asking thoughtful questions about the art we saw, and making jokes that had Dad laughing. It was like watching someone play a part in a movie, and the performance was so convincing that I began to doubt what I'd overheard. Maybe I'd misunderstood the phone call. Maybe I was being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild. But then I'd catch him checking his watch or see the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and the knot in my stomach would tighten again. As evening approached, Marcus suggested we get ready for dinner. "Calpep is supposed to be busy," he said. "We should probably head over early." I Googled the restaurant on my phone. It was real, a small, well-reviewed tapas bar known for its counter seating and fresh seafood. The reviews were excellent, the location convenient. On the surface, it seemed like a perfectly normal dinner suggestion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into some kind of trap. We dressed nicely, Mom in the blue dress she'd bought specifically for nice dinners on this trip, Dad in his good button-down shirt. Marcus wore a dark blazer that made him look more serious than usual.
As we walked through the Gothic quarter toward the restaurant, he kept up a steady stream of conversation about the day's sightseeing, but I noticed his hands trembling slightly when he thought no one was looking. The restaurant was exactly as advertised: small, crowded, with most seating at a curved counter facing the open kitchen. We managed to get 4 seats together, and I watched Marcus scan the room like he was looking for someone. The chef was animated and friendly, explaining dishes in rapid Spanish while preparing small plates that looked like works of art. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. We ordered wine, shared patatas bravas and jamón ibérico, listened to Dad attempt conversations with other diners. The food was incredible, the atmosphere warm and authentic. I began to relax, thinking maybe I'd imagined the whole conspiracy. But then Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed. The color drained from his face, and his hands started shaking again. "Excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. "I need to make a quick call." He stepped outside, and through the restaurant's window, I could see him pacing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear. His body language was tense, almost frantic. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going according to plan. When he returned 5 minutes later, his face was grim. "Everything okay?" Dad asked. Marcus looked directly at me when he answered. "Actually, no. There's something I need to tell all of you. Something I should have said a long time ago."
Chapter 5. The Truth Unveiled. The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too loud, too bright. Marcus's words hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see my parents exchanging worried glances. Other diners were chatting and laughing around us, oblivious to the fact that my world was about to implode. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" Mom's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath. He took a deep breath, his hands flat on the counter. "This trip isn't really about family bonding, is it, Sarah? It's about guilt." My heart stopped. "What? You organized this whole elaborate vacation, spent all this money, brought us all to Barcelona because you feel guilty about something. And I can't watch you torture yourself anymore." The blood rushed from my head. How could he possibly know about that? I'd never told anyone, never even written it down. It was my secret, my burden to carry alone. "I don't know what you're talking about," I whispered. "The accident, Sarah. The accident that wasn't really an accident?" Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the counter. Dad reached for her automatically, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus with growing horror. "Marcus, stop," I pleaded. "Not here, not like this." But he was relentless now, like a dam had burst and everything was pouring out at once. "She was supposed to be in the car that night, wasn't she, Sarah? April 15th, 3 years ago, you were supposed to drive Grandma to her doctor's appointment, but you asked me to do it instead because you had a date." The restaurant was spinning. Other diners were starting to stare, drawn by the tension radiating from our corner of the counter. The chef had stopped talking, watching our family drama unfold with concerned eyes. "I drove instead," Marcus continued, his voice breaking now. "I drove, and we hit that patch of ice, and the car went off the road, and Grandma died in the hospital 2 days later. But it should have been you driving. It should have been you!" "Marcus, please," Mom started. "No, let me finish. For 3 years, Sarah has been carrying this guilt, thinking Grandma's death is her fault because she asked me to take her instead. She's been punishing herself, working herself to death to pay for things like this trip, trying to make up for something that was never her fault in the first place." Tears were streaming down my face now. The secret I'd guarded so carefully, the crushing weight I'd carried every single day since Grandma's funeral, was now public knowledge in a crowded Barcelona restaurant. "But here's what Sarah doesn't know," Marcus said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Here's what I've been carrying for 3 years. The accident wasn't because of the ice. I was texting while driving. I was distracted, and I caused the crash that killed our grandmother." The silence that followed was deafening. Chapter 6. Shattered Foundations. I couldn't breathe. The restaurant tilted sideways and I gripped the counter to keep from falling off the stool. Around us, conversations had stopped. Even the chef was staring. "You were texting?" Dad's voice came out strangled. Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Some stupid work email. I thought it was important." I took my eyes off the road for maybe 5 seconds, and when I looked up, we were sliding toward the guardrail. I tried to correct, but it was too late. Mom made a sound like she was choking. 3 years? You've let us believe it was an accident for 3 years? Because it was easier than admitting I killed our mother through my own negligence. Marcus's voice cracked completely. And because Sarah was already blaming herself for not being in the car, I thought maybe it was better if she carried that guilt instead of me. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been working double shifts, skipping meals, denying myself any happiness because I thought I was responsible for Grandma's death, Marcus had been letting me suffer for his mistake. "You let me think—" I couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too big, too devastating. I know, and I've hated myself for it every single day. But I was a coward, Sarah. I was scared of losing my family, my job, my entire life. So I let you take the blame. "Get up," I said quietly. "Sarah, get up," my voice echoed through the restaurant. "Get up and get away from me." People were openly staring now, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly a spectacular family meltdown. The chef had abandoned all pretense of cooking and was watching us with the fascination of someone witnessing a car crash. Marcus stood slowly, his face crumpled with grief. "I brought us here to tell you the truth. I couldn't watch you destroy yourself anymore. I thought if I told you in public, you'd have to listen. You wouldn't be able to just walk away. You manipulated me into coming to Barcelona so you could humiliate me in front of strangers." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I could barely speak. "You planned this whole confrontation?" "Yes, I arranged for us to be here tonight because I knew you'd try to leave if I told you at the apartment. I needed you to hear all of it." Dad had gone completely silent, his face gray with shock. Mom was crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin that was already soaked through. 3 years, I repeated, standing up on shaking legs. 3 years of guilt, of self-punishment, of thinking I was responsible for Grandma's death, and you watched me suffer for something you did. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I wanted to tell you so many times. But you didn't. You let me pay for this trip with money I earned working myself to death out of guilt. You let me plan this vacation as some kind of penance for a sin I never committed." The weight of it was crushing. Not just the truth about the accident, but the realization that my own brother had manipulated my grief and guilt for 3 years to protect himself. Chapter 7. The Walk of Rage. I pushed past Marcus and stumbled out of the restaurant, leaving my parents and brother behind in the wreckage of our family dinner. The Gothic quarter's narrow streets welcomed me into their darkness, stone walls rising on either side like ancient guardians. I needed to walk, needed to move, needed to put distance between myself and the truth that had just shattered my world. My feet carried me automatically through the maze of medieval streets, past small plazas where couples sat on benches sharing wine, past shops selling tourist trinkets, past bars where laughter spilled out onto the cobblestones. Normal people living normal evenings, while my entire understanding of the last 3 years crumbled behind me. I'd given up everything for that guilt. Relationships, career opportunities, my own happiness, all sacrificed on the altar of responsibility for Grandma's death. I'd turned down promotions because I didn't deserve success. I'd broken up with David because I didn't deserve love. I'd isolated myself from friends because I didn't deserve joy. And Marcus had watched it all happen. My phone buzzed constantly. Texts from Mom, from Dad, probably from Marcus too, but I couldn't bear to read them. Instead, I walked deeper into the Gothic quarter, letting the ancient streets absorb my rage and grief. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was having the worst night of my life in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I found myself in a small plaza I didn't recognize, dominated by a Gothic church whose spires disappeared into the darkness above. A few people sat on the steps, young travelers with backpacks sharing stories and cheap wine. Their carefree voices made my chest ache with longing for a simplicity I'd given up 3 years ago. I sat on a bench facing the church and finally let myself cry properly. Not the shocked tears from the restaurant, but deep, body-shaking sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me. I cried for Grandma, who died because of Marcus's carelessness. I cried for the 3 years of self-punishment I'd endured for nothing. I cried for the life I'd put on hold, the opportunities I'd turned down, the happiness I'd denied myself. But mostly, I cried for the betrayal. Marcus wasn't just my brother. He'd been my closest friend, my confidant, the person I'd always turn to when life got complicated. And he'd used that trust to manipulate me into carrying his burden while he got to live freely. My phone rang. Mom's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Sarah, sweetheart, where are you?" "I don't know. Some plaza with a church." "Please come back. We need to talk about this as a family." "Family?" I left bitterly. "We haven't been a family for 3 years, Mom. We've been a lie held together by my guilt and Marcus's cowardice." "That's not true. Yes, Marcus made a terrible mistake, and yes, he compounded it by not telling the truth, but we're still a family, and we can work through this." "Can we? Because right now, I don't think I can ever look at him again without seeing the last 3 years of my life that he stole from me." There was a long pause. When Mom spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "Sarah, come back. Please. We're at the apartment. We can figure this out together." I hung up without answering and turned off my phone. I wasn't ready to figure anything out together. I wasn't ready to forgive or understand or move forward. I was ready to sit in this plaza and rage at the Gothic stones until my voice gave out.
Chapter 8. The Letter. I must have sat in that plaza for hours, watching the late-night crowds thin out until only a few die-hard revelers remained scattered across the ancient stones. The church bells chimed midnight, then 1, then 2, marking time that felt both endless and too short. Eventually, the cold drove me back toward our apartment, though I dreaded facing my family. The lights were still on when I climbed the stairs. I could hear voices through the door. Mom, Dad, and Marcus talking in low, urgent tones. My hand hesitated on the handle. Part of me wanted to turn around, find a hotel, catch the first flight back to the States. But running away felt too much like admitting defeat, and I'd already given up 3 years of my life to Marcus's lies. When I opened the door, the conversation stopped immediately. They were sitting around the small dining table, empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues scattered between them. Marcus looked like he'd aged a decade in the few hours since dinner. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "Sarah," Mom started, but I held up my hand. "I don't want to talk yet. I need to process this." "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Something I need to show you." He pulled out his phone and opened his email, then handed it to me. The screen showed a draft message that had been sitting unsent for over 2 years. The subject line read, "The truth about Grandma's accident." I scrolled through the message, which was addressed to me.
It detailed everything he'd confessed at the restaurant, the texting, the crash, his cowardice in letting me believe I was responsible. The timestamp showed it had been written just 3 months after Grandma's funeral. I've started to send this to you dozens of times. I'd write it, rewrite it, get as far as hovering my finger over the send button, then lose my nerve. I scrolled further and found more drafts, different versions of the same confession, some shorter, some longer, all unsent. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks ago. Why now? Why did you finally decide to tell me in the most humiliating way possible? Marcus looked at Dad, who nodded encouragingly. Because of the letter. What letter? Dad stood up and walked to his suitcase, returning with an envelope I recognized immediately. It was addressed in Grandma's careful handwriting to "My beloved family," and it was sealed with the wax seal she'd always used for important occasions. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I was afraid of what it might contain, but knew I had to open it.
Chapter 9. Grandma's Words. The wax seal broke with a soft crack, and I pulled out 3 sheets of Grandma's stationery, covered in her familiar handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pages steady. Mom moved to sit beside me on the couch, and Dad positioned himself on my other side. Marcus remained at the table, giving me space, but close enough to hear. "My beloved family," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong, and you need guidance I can no longer give you in person." I paused, overwhelmed by hearing Grandma's voice in my head. She'd always been the family's moral compass, the one who smoothed over conflicts and helped us see past our own hurt to find forgiveness. "I'm writing this because I know how much you all love each other, and I know how easily that love can be damaged by secrets and guilt. I've lived long enough to see many families destroyed by the very thing that should bind them together, their deep care for one another." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Mom rubbed my shoulder gently, encouraging me to continue. "If someone in our family has made a mistake, please remember that mistakes are not the same as malice. If someone has hurt you, please remember that hurt people often hurt others without meaning to. If someone has kept a secret, please remember that secrets are usually born from fear, not cruelty." I looked up at Marcus, whose face was streaked with tears. The letter felt like Grandma was speaking directly to our situation, as if she'd somehow known this exact scenario would unfold. "I want to tell you about the worst mistake I ever made," I continued reading. "When your grandfather was dying, I was so afraid of losing him that I made a decision that haunts me still. I was driving him to the hospital for what turned out to be his final treatment, and I was crying so hard I could barely see the road. I ran a red light and caused an accident that injured 2 people. My breath caught. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma was showing us that we weren't alone in our capacity for error. I never told anyone the truth about that accident. I let everyone believe it was the other driver's fault, and I carried that guilt for decades. It ate away at me, changed who I was, made me less generous with forgiveness because I couldn't forgive myself. Don't let secrets do that to you. Don't let guilt steal your capacity for joy." I had to stop reading. The parallels were too perfect, too painful. Grandma had lived with the same kind of secret that had been destroying our family, and she was warning us not to repeat her mistakes. The person who is reading this letter is probably the one carrying the heaviest burden. Please know that you are loved not because you are perfect, but because you are family. Forgiveness is not something you have to earn. It's something we give because we choose love over punishment." Marcus made a sound like a sob. "And to the person who needs to be forgiven, true redemption comes not from hiding your mistakes, but from making amends and choosing to be better. The family that can face the truth together
is the family that can heal together. I set the letter down, unable to continue. Grandma's words were exactly what we needed to hear, but they were also asking us to do the hardest thing imaginable, to forgive and be forgiven when the wounds were still fresh and bleeding.
Chapter 10. The Choice. The silence stretched between us like a bridge we weren't sure we could cross. Grandma's letter lay on the coffee table, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. Outside, Barcelona hummed with late-night energy, but inside our apartment, time seemed suspended. Marcus was the first to speak. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice hoarse from crying. "I know I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know the truth before it destroyed you completely." I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the restaurant. He looked broken, hollow, like someone who'd been carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. For 3 years, I'd been focused on my own guilt, but I'd never considered what living with that secret had done to him. "You watched me work myself to death," I said. "You watched me turn down David's proposal because I thought I didn't deserve happiness. You watched me isolate myself from friends, refuse promotions, live like I was doing penance. And you said nothing?" "I know." "That's not enough, Marcus. I know doesn't give me back 3 years of my life." He nodded, accepting the judgment in my words. "You're right, it doesn't. Nothing I can say or do will give you back those years. But maybe we can make sure the next 3 years are different." "How? How do we come back from this level of betrayal?" Dad cleared his throat. "Maybe we start by staying," he said quietly. "Maybe we don't let this end our family." "End our family?" I laughed bitterly. "Dad, our family has been built on a lie for 3 years. How do we even know what's real anymore?" "This is real," Mom said firmly. "Right now, all of us sitting here, telling the truth, choosing to face this together instead of running away, that's real." I wanted to argue, wanted to rage, wanted to pack my bags and fly home immediately. But something in Grandma's letter kept echoing in my mind. The family that can face the truth together is the family that can heal together. "I need conditions," I said finally. "If we're going to try to move forward, I need conditions." Marcus straightened slightly. "Anything." "First, you're going to pay me back every penny I spent on this trip. Not as punishment, but because I earned that money through guilt that you caused." "Of course." "Second, you're going to get therapy. Real therapy, not just promising to do better. You're going to figure out why you were willing to let me suffer for your mistake. I'll make an appointment as soon as we get home." "Third, you're going to tell Grandma's church what really happened. She was a member there for 40 years, and they deserve to know the truth about how she died." Marcus's face went pale, but he nodded. "Okay." "And fourth," I said, my voice breaking, "you're going to help me figure out how to forgive you, because I don't know how to do it alone, and I don't want to carry this anger for the rest of my life." The tears came then, not the angry tears from earlier, but something deeper. Grief for the time we'd lost, relief that the truth was finally out, and a fragile hope that maybe we could find our way back to each other. Marcus stood up slowly, and I could see him asking permission with his eyes. When I didn't move away, he crossed the room and knelt beside the couch. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so incredibly sorry for all of it. For the first time in 3 years, when my brother hugged me, I didn't feel the crushing weight of imaginary guilt. I felt his guilt instead. And surprisingly, that felt like the beginning of something that might eventually become forgiveness." Chapter 11. New Ground. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the apartment's tall windows and the sound of my family moving quietly in the kitchen. For a moment, I forgot where I was and what had happened. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and I braced myself for the emotional hangover. But something was different. The crushing weight I'd carried for 3 years, the constant gnawing sense that I was responsible for Grandma's death, was gone. In its place was a different kind of pain, cleaner and more honest. The pain of betrayal, of lost time, of trust that would need to be rebuilt, but also the pain of love that had survived the worst truth our family could tell. I found them at the small dining table, speaking in hushed tones over coffee and pastries. They looked up when I entered, faces carefully neutral, waiting to see what version of me would emerge from the wreckage of yesterday. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot Marcus had made. "How are you feeling?" Mom asked gently. "Like I've been hit by a truck. But also," I searched for the right words, "lighter, somehow. Like I've been holding my breath for 3 years and can finally exhale." Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "Grandma would be proud of you for choosing to stay and work through this." "I haven't chosen anything yet," I said, but without the venom that would have been there yesterday. "I'm still processing. I'm still angry. But I'm here." Marcus had been silent, but now he looked up from his untouched pastry. "I know you need time. I know I can't expect forgiveness just because I finally told the truth. But I want you to know that whatever happens next, I'm grateful you're willing to try." "I'm not doing this for you," I said honestly. "I'm doing it for me, because I'm tired of being angry, and I'm tired of guilt running my life." We spent the morning planning what to do with our remaining time in Barcelona. The trip I'd meticulously planned now felt like it belonged to a different person, the Sarah who'd organized every detail out of guilt and desperation to create perfect family memories. This new Sarah needed something different. "I want to see the places I missed while I was carrying your guilt," I told Marcus. "I want to experience Barcelona without the weight of Grandma's death on my shoulders." So we walked. Not to famous landmarks or tourist attractions, but through neighborhoods I had been too focused on itinerary following to explore. We wandered through Gracia with its small plazas and local cafes where families gathered for late lunches. We climbed to Parc de la Crueta del Coll, where the city spread out below us like a map of possibility. For the first time in 3 years, I felt present in my own life. Colors seemed brighter. Conversations seemed more real. Even the simple act of eating lunch felt like something I was choosing rather than something I was enduring as penance. Marcus was different too. Without the weight of his secret, he was more like the brother I remembered before the accident. He pointed out architectural details with genuine enthusiasm, made terrible jokes that had Dad groaning, helped Mom navigate her Spanish phrasebook with patient humor. But there were moments when the reality of what we were rebuilding hit me like a physical blow. When Marcus laughed at something Dad said, I remembered all the family dinners where he'd sat silent while I punished myself. When he bought Mom flowers from a street vendor, I thought about how he'd watched me work double shifts and said nothing. "This is going to take time," I told him as we sat on a bench in Ciutadella Park, watching families with young children play on the grass. "I know. I mean really take time. Years, maybe. There's gonna be days when I hate you all over again. I know. And you're gonna have to live with the fact that you chose to protect yourself instead of protecting me. You're gonna have to figure out how to be the kind of person who doesn't make that choice again." He was quiet for a long moment, watching a little girl chase pigeons while her parents laughed. "I've been thinking about that. About who I was 3 years ago versus who I want to be now. I think I was so afraid of disappointing people that I ended up doing something much worse." "You did. But I also think maybe this family has a pattern of carrying guilt that doesn't belong to us. Grandma carried guilt about Grandpa's accident for decades. You carried guilt about my mistake for 3 years. Maybe it's time to break that pattern." I looked at him, surprised by the insight. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean actions don't have consequences." "No, it doesn't.
and I'm prepared to live with the consequences of mine.
Chapter 12. Coming Home. Our last day in Barcelona dawned clear and warm, with the kind of golden light that makes everything look like a postcard. I stood on the apartment balcony watching the city wake up below me, vendors setting up their stalls, cafes opening their doors, people beginning their daily routines. For the first time since we'd arrived, I felt like I was truly seeing Barcelona instead of just moving through it. The past few days had been a strange mixture of healing and raw honesty. We'd talked more as a family than we had in years, not just about the accident and its aftermath, but about everything we'd been avoiding. Mom admitted she'd known something was wrong with me, but hadn't known how to help. Dad confessed he'd been struggling with his own guilt about not being closer to Grandma in her final years. Marcus shared details about the accident that were painful but necessary, how he'd replayed those 5 seconds thousands of times, how he'd almost confessed dozens of times but lost his nerve. It wasn't comfortable, but it was real. And after 3 years of living in a carefully constructed lie, real felt revolutionary. "Ready to go home?" Mom asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 cups of coffee. "I think so, though home feels different now than it did when we left." "Different how?" I thought about it. Scarier, maybe, but also more honest. I don't know who I am when I'm not carrying guilt about Grandma's death. I've been that person for so long that I forgot who I was before. "You were someone who laughed easily, Mom. Someone who took chances, who trusted people, who believed good things could happen to you. Think I can be that person again?" "I think you already are. You just proved it by choosing to stay and fight for this family instead of running away." We packed our bags slowly, taking time to fold clothes that had witnessed the destruction and tentative rebuilding of our relationships. Marcus helped me organize the souvenirs I'd bought, small things for friends back home who'd probably notice I seemed different when I returned. At the airport, as we waited for our flight, I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't in 3 years. I called David. "Sarah." His voice was surprised, but warm. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." I know I haven't been myself for a long time, but I wanted you to know that I figured out why, and I wanted to ask if maybe we could get coffee when I get back." There was a pause. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'd like to try again, if you're willing. I'm saying I'm ready to stop punishing myself for things that weren't my fault." "I'd like that very much." After I hung up, Marcus looked at me with something that might have been hope. "New beginning?" "For all of us," I agreed. The flight home was quieter than the flight to Barcelona, but it was a comfortable quiet. We were all processing, all figuring out how to move forward, but we were doing it together. And that felt like enough. As the plane lifted off from El Prat Airport, I looked down at Barcelona shrinking below us. The city that had witnessed our family's destruction and rebirth was becoming a memory, but not the kind of memory I'd planned to create. Instead of a perfect family vacation built on guilt and lies, it had become the place where we learned to tell the truth and choose healing over hiding. Sometimes the trips that go wrong are the ones that change everything. Sometimes the nightmares are exactly what we need to wake us up. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who end up showing us how to be free. If you've ever carried guilt that wasn't yours to carry, or if you've ever had to rebuild trust in a relationship that seemed broken beyond repair, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional travel stories about the journeys that change us from the inside out. Because sometimes the most important destinations aren't places on a map. They're the people we become when we're brave enough to face the truth.